This is the LUMIX GX80 or 85, and if you pair the camera with these two Pancake lenses, you get the perfect everyday carry. And that's what I'm gonna share with you in this episode. I'm gonna share a bit of the history, why I bought exactly this camera, also some of the key features, but it's not gonna be too technical. It's gonna be really a user experience that I'm gonna share with you, and also why I think this camera, the GX80, provides an extremely budget-friendly option with great image quality. So first things first, let's look a bit at the history and some of the key specs of this camera. It was released in April 2016, 16 megapixel CMOS sensor, micro four thirds. And before you start, micro four thirds is bad. No, it's not. It comes with IBIS. It also has a built-in flash, which comes in very handy. Little tilt screen on the back, as I said. Nice little viewfinder. We do have 4K video on board, 30 frames per second. Weighs about 400 grams, and this was also an important decision for me to buy this or rebuy this again, is the weight. It's really nice and compact. So I first had this camera, then sold it off in this episode where I had a brilliant idea to basically buy an X100V from Fuji, a camera that deeply disappoints episode here. So since that time I've always been looking to buy one back. Yeah, and what I've also learned in my time, my two favorite lenses on the LUMIX, in the top two at least, is here is the 14mm f2.8 and the 20mm f1.7. So I like those for two reasons. Micro four thirds has a crop factor of 2. 28mm is basically 14mm. The 20mm I chose focal length of roughly 40mm, comes very close to the line of sight that we have. And that's what I really like about it. Now, if you're interested in a whole lot of budget LUMIX lenses, please check out this episode I made about 3 years ago about it. Yeah, so for me that was really about an everyday carry. Should not be as big as my Sony a7 III, which I'm filming on right now. That's a great camera too, but not as an everyday carry in my opinion. Yeah, so let's go into the photography part. This camera was the predecessor from the much liked GX9, not to confuse with the G9, the GX9. But there's a factor of price here. I bought this for 265 euros after a year of carefully searching for the good deal, which I think is great money. But the GX9, for instance, is a little bit more expensive. Yeah, so I looked at this from a photography point of view. This camera does have video specs as well. You've got 4K 30 frames per second, full HD, so 1080p with 60 frames per second. For video on this camera, I don't think it was designed for video, with some little video capabilities. So you can easily do your photography and then you have a little bit of video. It wasn't designed as a content creator's camera like you see nowadays, or a vlogging camera like so many have failed. It doesn't come with a audio jack. So you can't record audio, you can externally. So when it comes to the photography, I use this as an everyday carry. And some of you will say, but hold on Paul, you're the Fuji X-T30 Mark II guy. Correct, I still use that too. I use my Leicas. But this is by far, even more than my Ricoh. I would bring this with me because you've got interchangeable lenses. I can just sling it around my shoulder, put these two lenses in my pocket, and off I am. No weight whatsoever. That's one of the biggest benefits. But when using this camera, there are a few things I really like about it. First of all, the JPEG, straight out of camera with the own camera profiles. Yeah, it's not as expensive as the ones on Fuji, but they definitely rival their own quality. And I think that's not often said here on YouTube, is that LUMIX and OM system deliver great color science. It's got their own unique views, and the big thing on this camera is you can basically modify those colors the way you want to. So that's purely on the color level and on the sharpness level. And then you have an additional level where you can check out the waveform. So bringing up the shadows or bringing down the highlights purely in profile. And I think when you're shooting every day, you want something that's simple, easy to navigate. And that's also a point. The LUMIX menus are very easy to navigate. They even have a little rolling bar on every little feature where you can see what it does, and I think that makes this camera perfect for beginners as well. Then there's another quirky feature, the panorama feature, and that makes a really interesting one. I've used this on my G7. I used to do this all the time when I, for instance, have a lens like this and it's a little bit too narrow. You can use the panorama function just to go and you get a nicely straightened picture in general if you don't move too much. So basically whatever lens you have, however narrow it is, you can use this function for 1 or 2 seconds and you get a really nice wider shot. So that's one of the things I really appreciate in this camera. Then there are the aspect ratios, and this might sound a little bit silly, like okay, you have them on every camera, but I like shooting in 4:3 or in 1:1. Those are the two aspect ratios I really use a lot. 1:1, boxy, it just gives a different feel to your picture. Composition wise, you have to kind of reframe a few things. Of course, you're not utilizing the entire sensor, so you don't get high megapixels, but who cares, right? If you just want to use it like me, every day, document your life kind of thing, it's perfect, suit my needs. What is my most favorite mode on this camera? It's actually intelligent auto. Yeah, this sounds stupid because, you know, if you're an enthusiastic photographer like all of us, you have to use manual or aperture priority. No, I love the intelligent auto here. It makes life way more easier, specifically when you're in more challenging lighting circumstances. Normally I would have to tweak and do everything. Now it just doesn't. And I really appreciate it because you get the nice colors. Your ISO in general tend to handle well. If you really go into low light, by the way, then this camera, I said in a previous episode, oh, it handles so well. Well, actually, it struggles compared to a full frame, that's standalone and medium frame, fast lenses, right? So, and the fact that it's actually pocketable, just sling around your shoulder is great. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't have a weather sealing, which brings us to the big kahuna in the room. Guess. Autofocus. Popular belief here on YouTube is that LUMIX autofocus out of all cameras on the entire planet is so poor you can't get anything into focus, which is also a load of nonsense. If you look at 2016, right, you had the Fujifilm X-T1 I think and the X-T2. Name me one person who would use continuous autofocuses on those cameras. Nobody. If you want to have perfect continuous autofocus, pick Canon, Sony definitely, maybe Nikon. And that's one thing. If you shoot single, it's not any different than any of the older Fuji models, or any model basically. Fuji introduced the X-T3, better autofocus, still not perfect, yeah, and Lumix with the GH, I think it's 7 now out, and the the G9 Mark II. Basically, then maybe not at Sony level, but they're not left behind anymore. And I think that's a very important thing in modern day world, modern technology. But if you shoot photography, like most of us do, the continuous mode I would only use when you're shooting fast moving objects like birds, cars, cyclers, whatever. Yeah, then this is probably not the camera for you. But for your everyday carry, I find this perfect. The facial tracking, what I've noticed is if you use the 20mm, it does seem to do a less good job than the 14mm, which is strange because this normally should be going a little bit faster, but when it comes to facial tracking, the 14 seems to be doing a lot better. And so when it comes to video, especially what I said here is that the 20 has two problems. It definitely hunts a lot, even when you go into filming just simple things, it hunts a lot, and the aperture blades are cracking. Now you don't have an external recording device here, but you will still hear it on your the internal recordings here on the internal microphones. So for filming, 20 is great when you have static objects and stuff. Despite its big aperture, it's quite a noisy lens and it hunts significantly, whereas the 14 is way more stable. I used to film a lot of my episodes here on the channel on the 14mm, and I think it does a decent thing, not when I compare it to Sony, but when I compare it to Fuji, even the XX20 and the X-T4, sure, it's maybe a little bit less, but it's not as diabolical as everybody says. So if you're looking for a simple everyday carry-on with 1 or 2 Pancake lenses, consider in general LUMIX or Olympus cameras because they're still great value for money.